I make my terminally ill mother give me $200,000 every time I visit her. Growing up in the suburbs, my life was pretty standard. It was just me, 31 million, my brother, 29 million, and our parents, Mom, 58F, and Dad, 61M. We were raised just outside Chicago, and our family was all about Michigan sports. Football and tennis were big deals in our house. If you wanted my dad's approval, which meant a lot since he was the man of the house, you needed to be into either football or tennis. Given that neither of my parents were tall or broad-shouldered, tennis was the obvious choice. I liked tennis well enough, but I was more into programming and video games. I played tennis to stay in shape and made the high school team, but it wasn't my passion. My brother, on the other hand, absolutely loved it. He got so good that he earned a scholarship, which made my dad incredibly proud. While my parents treated us well, it was clear my brother was my dad's favorite, while I was closer to my mom. She shared my love for video games, and we could spend hours playing together. There was one big thing that made us different: money. Neither of my parents really worked. They took on small jobs at the school or tennis clubs to stay close to us, but that was mostly it. This was because my maternal grandfather had left a trust fund for my mom and her two sisters before he passed. I didn't know exactly how much was in it when we were kids, but now my mom's share is over $12 million. She'd used some of it over the years to buy a house and cars, but they mostly lived off the dividends, which are well into the six-figure range. There was one catch with the trust. Only blood relatives could access it. So, while my dad had no claim, if my mom approved, my brother and I could have access. She always said she'd give us our share when we turned 30. Well, I'm over 30 now, and I haven't seen a dime. To explain that, we have to go back to 2019, when I found my fiancée, who I had been with since my sophomore year at Michigan, in bed with my brother. This had apparently been going on for months, and they didn't know how to break it to me. At the time, I had a full-time job working for a tech company and had just finished creating a video game with a friend. My brother, meanwhile, was a professional tennis player. When the affair happened, he was on a high after winning the Big Ten tennis championship in his senior year and making it to the French Open quarterfinals in his first pro season. Side note, he got crushed by Nadal. 6-0, 6-0, 6-0. Seriously, what a joke. But apparently that was enough for my fiancé to toss aside our 8-year relationship. Off topic, but seriously, screw her. The fallout hit my brother hard at first. My mom lost it, calling him a disgrace and cutting him off financially. My dad, while more sympathetic, still supported her. Losing their support was a blow for my brother, as he had relied on them to fund his tennis training. Then, about 3 months after this all blew up, I got invited to a family dinner. I thought nothing of it at the time, but when I arrived, it was my dad, my uncle and his wife, my mom, my brother, and, wait for it, my ex-fiancée. I almost turned around and left, but my mom begged me to stay and hear them out. My brother apologized, saying he was in love and that he never intended to hurt me. It just happened. My uncle chimed in with his story, sharing how he and his wife had made similar mistakes. They had started their relationship as an affair. My dad emphasized the importance of family, saying we needed to stick together, while putting a hand on my brother's shoulder. My brother shot me this smug look, knowing he'd won. The entire time, my mom avoided eye contact. Finally, after listening to all their speeches, I turned to her and asked if she agreed with all this. With tears running down her face, she nodded. That's when I stood up and said, "Well, I hope you all have a good life, but I'm done with it." As I was leaving, my dad yelled that if I walked out, I'd lose my access to the trust fund. I stopped and asked my mom if that was true. Crying, she nodded and quietly said, "Yes." I looked her straight in the eye and said, "I'll never forgive you for this betrayal." She broke down into sobs, but no one followed me out. That was the last time I saw or heard from any of them until about a month ago. 5 years of no contact. My aunt called and said my mom was in the hospital and desperately wanted to see me. I refused. She kept calling, and finally, on the 5th attempt, she offered $100,000 if I'd meet with her. I countered with $200,000 and a promise that my dad and brother wouldn't be there. She agreed. The next day, the bank called to confirm the wire transfer. Once the $200,000 hit my account, I called my aunt to set up the meeting. I went to the hospital, and there was my mom, looking terrible. Stage 4 lung cancer. The same thing her dad had. As promised, my dad and brother weren't there. We talked for an hour. I told her about my life. I had sold my first video game, and while it did okay, I was working on a second one. I also told her about my girlfriend of 3 years and how she was pregnant with our first child. My mom was thrilled to hear that. She tried to talk about my dad and brother, but I cut her off. At this point, she broke down, saying that letting me go was the biggest mistake of her life. She cried so much that the nurses had to check on her. It only got worse when I told her leaving the family was the best decision I'd ever made, and I had no intention of forgiving her. No amount of money, $6 million or not, was worth what they put me through. As I turned to leave, she begged me to help rebuild our relationship. I told her I'd consider visiting twice a week for $200,000 per visit, but only under the condition that there would be no contact with my dad or brother. She agreed, and in the past month, I've made $1.6 million. I don't plan to forgive anyone, and I won't attend her funeral, but I'll happily drain that trust to stick it to my dad and brother. 2 hours a week with someone I despise is worth it if it causes them pain. 9 months have passed since I last posted, and my mom passed away 3 weeks ago, about a month after my daughter was born. My mom got to meet my daughter, though I wanted to charge $1 million for that privilege. My girlfriend said no, so I let it go. People often ask how my girlfriend feels about me charging my mom for visits. While she thought it was harsh at first, she gets it, especially since she's been cheated on too. Plus, most of the money is going into a trust for our kids, which I can't even touch. I don't want what happened to me to happen to them, and honestly, I don't even trust myself with that kind of money. In the end, I visited my mom 53 times and walked away with $10.8 million. Between that and her medical bills, the trust is down to less than $200,000. She died just in time because she couldn't afford me anymore. True to my word, I didn't attend her funeral or the reading of her will. I'm not too happy about that, though. Apparently it didn't go well, because now my dad's lawyer is threatening to sue me for taking advantage of a dying woman. But I've got my bases covered. She signed everything, and she was in her right mind, or as much as she could be, given what her decisions led to. My brother's wife has been blowing up my phone, though it doesn't seem to be my ex-fiancé. Hilarious. She must have left him when his tennis career tanked. He hasn't made a grand slam since before COVID. So much for love. My dad has been trying to track me down, calling from different numbers and leaving messages ranging from furious rants to pitiful pleas. Without that trust fund, he's got nothing. No job, no 401k, no pension. He'll be working for the rest of his life, probably at some fast food joint. Actually, that's an insult to fast food workers. My dad's never worked that hard in his life. He couldn't even manage that. My lawyer thinks I might be able to get them to sign a deal promising not to sue in exchange for $200,000 each. That would be chef's kiss. Perfect in a way they'll never even understand. I've given my lawyer the green light to move forward with the offer. Most of the money is going into the trust for my kids, but I did splurge a little. I bought a ring for my girlfriend and got us a nicer condo in Lincoln Park, which is where she's always wanted to live. Oh, and I paid someone to send my dad Ohio State jerseys with his name on them for the next 3 years, just to mess with him. I think this will be my last update. I hope you all are doing well, and remember, when someone betrays you, always be petty. Now on to the next story, story 2. My 35-year-old sister is attempting to rekindle a relationship with her ex-husband, who has struggled with cocaine addiction but has been sober for 5 months. I'm 33 and non-binary, and I'm unsure how to approach her about this choice. How should I talk to her? So, last night, my sister, who's 35, decided to book a flight to spend a week with her ex-husband, who's 34, for her birthday. It's clear he's on board with it too. I'm 33, and I want to have a conversation with her about this, but honestly, I'm not sure how to even begin. It seems like a bad choice, both from an objective and personal standpoint, for both of them. They were married for 5 years and have been divorced for 4. He's struggled with a cocaine addiction for over a decade, something that's been a part of his life since his late teens or early 20s, long before they ever met. He's been sober for the past 5 months, following a suicide attempt this past spring. It wasn't the first time he'd made plans, but it was the first time he actually tried to go through with it. That experience seemed to wake him up, and since then he's been sober and moved back to his hometown to be closer to his family. His sister had a serious health scare, and he's now the backup caregiver for her baby right after her and her husband. He's also working 2 jobs and recently became a business owner. Before all this, though, he had kept his addiction hidden from my sister for nearly 7 years. She didn't even realize what was going on until well into their marriage. His family knew about it the whole time, but never told her, likely hoping she'd somehow fix him because she's always been health conscious and responsible. When they were married and his addiction was getting worse, my sister finally figured it out. By then, he'd already run up over $10,000 of debt in her name. Despite earning thousands of dollars per night as a server at a high-end restaurant, he still had her covering all the rent and bills. To top it off, he was cheating on her. She found another woman's earrings in their bed. He even flaunted his affair with a co-worker, someone he eventually left my sister for, just to hurt her. He'd come home late, high and drunk, wake her up in the middle of the night because he was bored, and sometimes even wet the bed while she was trying to get some sleep before her exhausting 12-hour shifts. In 2019, he kicked her out of their apartment, the one she paid for and decorated. He later allowed her to come back for a few months, before kicking her out again in early 2020. Thankfully, because of the timing of her move, she was able to finalize their divorce in 2020, just as the COVID lockdowns began. It was a huge relief, a moment of victory and safety for her. That didn't stop him from refusing to pay back the $10,000, though. He kept calling to berate her, apologizing only to do it all over again. He constantly came up with new reasons why she actually owed him, making everything as painful and difficult as possible, even though there was no practical reason for them to interact anymore. She spent months, maybe even years, crying herself to sleep because of this man. She moved back in with our parents, where I also live, and she was so emotionally unstable and aggressive that I had to put a lock on my bedroom door. There were nights I had to rock her to sleep, like a baby, just to comfort her. We went to Al-Anon meetings. We did everything we could to cut him off from contacting her or anyone she knew. His actions hurt her so deeply. I can't lie, I hate this man with a passion. Fast forward to this spring. He called her and shared his whole "I'm sober now" story, having been clean for about a month at that point. She immediately wanted to see if they could make things work again. She even hid the fact that he came to visit for a week. After some time, they agreed it wasn't going to work out. They even went to see a psychic, who confirmed they weren't compatible. I only know all this because I kept having these intense gut feelings, like a weird physical sensation telling me he's near her again. I tried to brush it off, thinking I was paranoid, but eventually my best friend told me she'd overheard my sister talking to hers, confirming that he'd indeed visited. I haven't said much about it, other than texting my sister late one night saying, "I don't even know why I'm saying this, but please don't let this man back into your life." This was before I knew what was really happening. Lately, my sister's been in a vulnerable place. Her job is stressful, and she's not earning as much as she hoped. We were supposed to work together, but I had to step away to focus on my health. My body was shutting down, and I couldn't even explain it to her. She's understandably frustrated and even resentful that I'm not working with her, but I simply can't until I've recovered. She's expressed how overwhelmed she feels, saying things like, "Who's going to take care of me?" That breaks my heart, because I couldn't even say I will, since I'm struggling just to take care of myself right now. To make things worse, she's been putting me down, controlling me, and, though I hate to admit it, emotionally abusing me for the past year. I've only recently started realizing that all the things she's been saying about me aren't true. I mention this because, while we've always been close, if she's treating me this way, what's going to happen if her ex does something she doesn't like? Even if he's a changed man, he's bound to mess up at some point. He used and abused her before, and now she's emotionally volatile, taking it out on me. Plus, he's a recovering addict who attempted suicide just this year. This whole situation feels like a ticking time bomb, and as much as I dislike him, I don't want to see either of them get hurt again. Our relationship isn't in the best place right now, but I still feel like I need to talk to her about this. I want to understand why she's doing this. While I'd love to convince her to stay away from him, I know she'll ultimately make her own decisions. Here's the thing, though. When she booked the flight, she told me she believes things will be different this time because he has too much at stake to relapse. But, from what I understand, experts always say that people in early recovery should focus on their sobriety and stability, not dive into new or old romantic relationships, especially ones filled with painful history. From what I know, my sister should be the last person he needs in his life right now, with everything else he's taken on. When I mentioned this to her, she just said, "Yeah, well, I think it'll be good this time." I tried to explain that it's not about thinking, it's about giving recovery the time it needs to stick. And what bothers me most is that now there's too much at stake, but there wasn't before. Not their marriage, not her dignity, not even their shared assets. All those things didn't matter, but now it's different. It's heartbreaking because, from where I'm standing, her self-esteem seems to be in the gutter. It feels like she's making a decision that, while unwise to others, she believes she can handle. But I could be wrong, of course. I know I can't control her, and I don't want to criticize her decision or tear her down for it. But how do I have this conversation with her? What questions should I ask? Is there information I'm missing that could help? I want to talk to her in a way that makes her feel heard and safe, even though this whole situation is hard for me to deal with.